And Jill, take it away. I'm going to start my screen share right now.
Great, thank you, Moselle. So I'm Jill Emerson. I'm the Water Quality Coordinator here at Green Mountain Conservation Group. And I've been on board since June of 2018. And today I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the water quality data that we have for Danforth Bay. Before I start going into the actual data, I wanted to spend just a few moments talking about different lake types and some of the terminology that I'll use in the presentation. So bear with me if you know these terms, great, but some may not. So let's get to it. So lakes in general are broken up into three really broad classifications. They can be oligotrophic, which is what actually Ossipee Lake in our area is, along with Broad Bay and Levitt Bay. They can be mesotrophic, which is currently the designation given to Danforth Bay. Berry Bay is also a mesotrophic lake. And then there's eutrophic lakes, which we don't have any of these in our area currently, but probably in America, the most famous one right now is Lake Erie. So you can see here on the right-hand side some pretty dramatic footage of one of their cyanobacteria blooms that happened in 2017. So that's Cincinnati there on the side. And that is just a terrific picture and a horrific picture of a bloom happening on that lake in 2017. So on the next slide, you'll see that there's also some other classifications that are usually, you know, in between classifications of those broad three, but pretty much those three are what we're talking about here. So an oligotrophic lake tends to be a lake that is pretty clear with pretty clear water, has low sediment buildup, doesn't really have a lot of weeds along the shorelines. Usually just, there's pine trees and birch trees, new forest growth around it. The cooler temperatures tend to be better for certain fish populations. And so those are some of the hallmarks of oligotrophic lakes. Mesotrophic lakes are lakes that are still relatively cool, but perhaps slightly warmer than they've historically been. They're starting to see some sediment buildup. They tend to be a little bit shallower, although not necessarily in every case. Weeds start to accumulate on the shoreline, and a lot of times the forest surrounding it tends to be more of your deciduous trees. And finally, eutrophic is basically that your lake is trying to turn into a meadow. So you can think of this whole process that lakes go through as the meadowification of a lake. So they tend to be pretty shallow, they're very murky, they have high weed buildup. A lot of times now there's grassland. And this is a natural process that lakes go through. So next slide, Moselle. So natural eutrophication tends to take centuries or even millennia to achieve. So all lakes do eventually go through this process of this meadowification. But what we're finding is now, because of building and what's considered cultural eutrophication, so basically just development, that we have expedited this process into decades rather than centuries or millennia. So the other terms that I want to go through real quick are just that lakes undergo this process of thermal stratification. So this happens in the summer, where you actually will get distinct layers of a lake that form. Anybody who has gone swimming in a lake and has stuck their feet down will be able to tell you that yes, the lower you go into the lake, the cooler the water temperature is. And this, what we do when we go out and we sample is we're actually getting information from each of these three layers of a lake. Now, lakes in our climates are also considered diurnal, which means that they overturn twice a year, in the spring and in the autumn. So in the summer, we see the stratification, and then as the water temperature cools, we get mixing of the oxygen and the nutrients at the bottom. During the winter, everything is pretty stabilized, and then we have that spring overturn and summer lather, rinse, repeat. So this is the natural process in our areas that lakes go through. So what you can see is that GMCG and our friends at Ossipee Lake Alliance, we go out and we monitor the lakes and bays in our area each summer from May through September. And we go out once a month and we're taking information from the deep spots of the lake. So here you can see just some pictures of us in pre-COVID times out sampling. Using tools like the camera bottle, which is that glass tube thing in the middle picture, We're using plankton tow nets to get some information on chlorophyll, and we use all of these tools every month to go out and monitor as part of the volunteer lake assessment program run through New Hampshire DES. So from that, we generate a group of data. So these are 2019's data. We don't have 2020's data available yet. And it gives you sort of a broad overview of what each lake and bay's health is. So here you can see just some general information on what Danforth Pond is. So here you can see it's mesotrophic, you get the rough size, how much shoreline there is. And the overall snapshot for the lake data are relatively good. You can see that pH does have a slightly bad designation, but overall, in a broad picture sense, the lake health is not terrible. When we break it down a little bit further, whoops, oh no, we advanced too far.
I'm sorry, are we good?
Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
So when we look at this a little bit closer, what we see here in the upper left-hand side in this temperature and dissolved oxygen profile is that we can see that Danforth Bay does have some internal phosphorus loading problems. So here in this graph, everything in the green is temperature, and then everything in the orange, browny, red kind of colors are the dissolved oxygen. So you can see that once you hit about 8 meters down or so, you've completely depleted all of your oxygen in Danforth Bay. So these anoxic conditions, which is what we call when we have low oxygen or no oxygen present, is really indicative of internal phosphorus loading issues. You can also see that in the bottom chart with the little red circle around it. So we have information on the epilimnion, so the top layer of the lake, the metalimnion, which is the middle layer, and then the hypolimnion, which is the very bottom. So you can see that the phosphorus is relatively high in the bottom layer of the lake, which is also indicative of internal loading. The other thing that we note in the data over the past couple of years, and this is the graph in the upper right hand, is that you can see that purple section that has been circled. That is the amount of cyanobacteria that we are pulling out of the water column anytime that we test. And so if you compare those values to 2013, 14, and 16, there's definitely been an increase in the cyanobacteria that's found in the lake at any given sampling. Which compares directly to the fact that we've seen cyanobacteria blooms the last couple of years. Next slide, Moselle. So for those who have not heard the term cyanobacteria, let me give you a little bit of a primer. I know a lot of us, particularly in the area, are well versed on cyanobacteria, but for those who this is their first time, cyanobacteria is a bacteria that has the ability to photosynthesize. It is sometimes referred to as blue-green algae, which is a little bit of a misnomer. It doesn't have to be blue-green, although typically it is, and it's certainly not an algae. It has a unique pigment to it called phycocyanin. There's also other colors. So there's chlorophyll, which is green, and there's phycoerythrin, which is a red color. And as you can see from the pictures in marine environments, you can get a wide array of cyanobacteria colors. Some of them are pretty dramatic looking. The color pigments is dependent upon a lot of different factors, how much bacteria you have, the ratio of pigments, the lighting, and so on. We can, for all of the complaining we do about cyanobacteria, we do need to thank them for the fact that we have an oxygenated Earth. Cyanobacteria was one of the first organisms to produce oxygen, and it changed us from a carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide environment into a oxygenated environment. So you'll always find it in lakes. It's always there. So I can go and pull a sample at any point in time in a lake, and I'll always see a little bit of cyanobacteria, and low growth is normal for a lake. So in New Hampshire, we have what we call the dirty dozen. So these are the 12 most common types of cyanobacteria that you'd find in any given lake in New Hampshire. You certainly can find others. There's a wide array of cyanobacteria. There's thousands of different flavors and species, but these are about the most common 12 that you'll see. And what's really interesting about it is that you can see that they're in all different shapes and sizes and what I jokingly refer to as flavors, although I would encourage you not to eat the cyanobacteria, but you can see that they have many different phenotype associated with them. But these tend to be the ones that we see in our area. The reason that we're concerned about this is that cyanobacteria can produce toxins that can be detrimental to life. So each cyanobacteria has the ability to create toxins. Blooms tend to be really hard to diagnose because a bloom could be toxic, it could not be toxic, part of the bloom could be toxic, and the other part may not be. It's really quite variable. And so the easiest thing to do is to just assume that every bloom is toxic. These are this is a small list of the types of toxins. These are the more common ones that we'll see. And exposure to toxins can be anything, can result in anything from a skin rash to some digestional tract problems, all the way up through liver, kidney, and heart failure. So being exposed to cyanotoxins is really no joke. And so we encourage people, when they see a bloom, to stay out of it, but also blooms tend to be really, they cause a lot of pet death every year. So also keep your pets out of any water that you think may have a cyanobacteria bloom happening. So on the next few slides, these are the blooms that have been happening on Danforth for the past 3 years, at least since I joined. And what I like about these first two pictures is that you can really see in a singular bloom the difference between how a bloom may present itself. So in the photo on the left, it really looks like somebody dumped a bunch of blue-green paint into the water. And the photo on the very far right, I have been told looks like elephant snot, or perhaps silly string that somebody sprayed. This bloom was a mixture of two different common cyanobacterias. One is Anabana, which is the bottom picture, and the other one is Oscillatoria. Oscillatoria tends to be a very benthic or a low water organism, where Anabana is usually found more along shoreline blooms. Anabana or Dolichospermum, they're very closely related. That's actually the bloom we saw in 2019. So on the next slide, you can see that thank you. So here you can see again that classic, looks like somebody dumped some green paint in the water. Dolichospermum is a close relative to Anabana. This is this type of organism looks like beads on a string. And so it has a very definitive phenotype that you can see. This bloom, fortunately, was only up and out in about a week. So has a pretty quick turnaround time, which is usual for an Anabana bloom or a Dolichospermum bloom, but they do tend to come back relatively quickly as well. And then this past year, we saw Oscillatoria subgroup, Planktothrix isothrix, which is that, again, that flaking flecks that we saw in 2018. So a very similar benthic type cyanobacteria came up and was on the lake for a couple of weeks in Danforth this summer. So cyanobacteria, it looks for three things. It looks for sunlight and increased temperatures, which there's not going to be much that we can do to control this on an individual or a lake level. It also is looking for some nitrogen. Now, it will happily use any available nitrogen in the water, but if there isn't any available, it can actually go through this process called nitrogen fixation, where it will take atmospheric nitrogen and convert it into a usable form. So while it's good for us to be controlling the nitrogen, that's not going to prevent the blooms. So what we really need to do here is to control the phosphorus levels of the lake. Phosphorus is a major component of all organic life. It is, anybody who does gardening will tell you, it is a major component in a lot of fertilizers. So any organic material does contain phosphorus in it. So this is where GMCG was really trying to target what we call Project BMP, or best management practices. So I'm going to kick it over to Moselle here, because this has been her project for the past 2 years, is working on Project BMP for Green Mountain.
Thank you, Jill. All right, that was great. We've got some more people who were admitted, so welcome. If you missed the beginning, my name is Moselle Spiller. I'm the outreach coordinator at Green Mountain Conservation Group, and this is a presentation on water quality at Danforth Bay, one of the upper bays of Ospey Lake, and ways that we can be proactive to improve water quality through best management practices. I'm going to play a video that documents the past 2 years of BMP work we've been doing at Green Mountain. And this work has been funded through a watershed assistance grant, and that's a 319 grant through the EPA and New Hampshire DES. And those funds have been helping us build actual BMPs or landscaping techniques that prevent stormwater runoff from reaching the lake and loading more phosphorus. So you'll learn all about that in this video. Give me one moment to share my screen. One moment. Jill, can you see the video? Not yet. Okay. Okay, we're going. Yay.
Rain gardens, barrels, and buffers. How we are protecting lakes and rivers, and you can too. Green Mountain Conservation Group is a nonprofit charitable organization dedicated to the conservation of shared natural resources in the Ospey watershed since 1997. The Ospey watershed contains the Ospey Aquifer, New Hampshire's largest stratified drift aquifer and drinking water resource. Stratified drift aquifers consist mainly of layers of sand and gravel, parts of which are saturated and can yield water to wells or springs. The sand and gravel deposits found in the Ospey Aquifer were deposited by water from melting glaciers. These aquifers are high-yield aquifers that can recharge quickly with rainwater but are also vulnerable to easy contamination. Water knows no boundaries, and what we do that affects water quality in our backyards also affects our neighbors downstream. The Ospey Lake Watershed Management Plan provides a roadmap for preserving water quality in the Ospey watershed. As part of this plan, a build-out analysis and volunteer shoreline watershed stormwater surveys were conducted. Results of these efforts were used to run a land use model or lake loading response model that estimated the historical, current, and projected amount of total phosphorus being delivered to the lake from the watershed. Shorefront residential property was identified as a significant threat to water quality. Direct shoreline areas are typically among the highest for pollutant loading given their proximity to the water. According to the 2015 Phase 1 survey, 62% of shoreline parcels showed characteristics detrimental to lake water quality, such as inadequate buffers, evidence of bare soil, and structures within 75 feet of the shoreline. After a storm, water that falls on soil is able to infiltrate down into the ground, eventually finding its way into the aquifer. Water that falls on impervious surfaces such as roads, driveways, and paved parking lots does not soak into the surfaces. Instead, it flows across those surfaces toward a low point. The water flows at increased speed over those impervious surfaces, scouring up oils, salt, and sediment, carrying phosphorus, nitrogen, and other chemicals. The flow carries the pollutants downward into the watershed and eventually deposits those pollutants into the lake. Best management practices can help reduce the amount of non-point source pollution entering the lake. These include structural designs such as rain gardens, barrels, and buffers. During the summers of 2019 and 2020, GMCG partnered with multiple private residents, businesses, and summer camps located on shoreline properties in Effingham, Freedom, and Ossipee. GMCG worked with these partners to design and install rain gardens, water bars, buffers, infiltration steps, and dry wells engineered specifically to reduce the amount of stormwater entering the lake. Now, finally, I'm excited to share with you the following projects. Site number 1, Camp Calumet, located in the northern point of the Big Lake. This site is located between the shoreline and a dirt road. Along this dirt road were multiple camp cabins and buildings, all impervious surfaces that were causing stormwater runoff to go down to the lake and cause erosion. There we found evidence of erosion, such as exposed tree roots. One area in particular was collecting a big puddle, a perfect place for a rain garden. Here's a concept drawing showing the cross-section of the rain garden. The center, the brown area, is planting soil, and around it is 3/4 inch crushed stone, a common material used in BMPs. Here's Bill Day, where volunteers are planting native perennial plant species. By choosing native perennials, you help to ensure that your BMP will last over the years. This rain garden project was completed in just one morning, thanks to these volunteers. BMP site number 2 is Camp Huckins, located on Broad Bay. Camp Huckins is another large summer camp with multiple cabins and buildings and their own beach. Here's the flow of the water going over the bank into the lake. And here's the trench. It's about 4 feet wide and 2 feet deep. It's lined with landscape fabric and filled with washed, crushed stone. BMP site number 3 is Danforth Bay Campground, located on Danforth Bay. Danforth Bay Campground is a large commercial campground which sees a lot of use in the summer months. This is the site of an infiltration step project located between a bathhouse and a sloping gravel driveway. Here's the original staircase where we found very severe erosion. Here's the drip line trench underneath the building. Here's another section of the eroded staircase. And below the staircase on the beach, we found many signs that too much water was making its way down. These designs were prepared by Forrest Bell Associates in Maine. And here is a midway point when the infiltration steps were being framed out. And these infiltration steps were filled with crushed stone. The steps were covered in boards, but with enough room between the boards so that water could still flow down into the infiltration stones.
Here we have a slope with a dirt road coming down to a driveway, all sloping down, down, down. And here we have a paved walkway, which is also sloping to a concrete walkway sloping down to the infiltration steps and the steep slope that goes down to Danforth Bay and the beach at the campground. Well, this is the dry well, and water comes down this paved ramp walkway, comes down into the infiltration step, and some of the extra runoff can make its way down this pipe into the dry well. And then here we have a building with a metal roof, and water's coming down the roof and would normally spill onto the ground and create runoff down the steep slope to the lake. But now we have an
infiltration trench.
Yes.
And at the bottom of this 1.5-inch stone is a perforated pipe. So that pipe carries the water that runs off the roof into this dry well right here.
BMP site number 4 is Camp Maris, located on Levitt Bay in Effingham. Camp Maris has a large beach area and a lot of sandy soil. Here's the location of a vegetated buffer. This concept rendering shows the buffer designed to sponge up water coming down the slope. Here's Build Day, where volunteers are shoveling crushed stone around the inner vegetated buffer. The plants we chose were all native and perennial species. And because this is a summer camp, we were sure not to pick anything that had thorns or would attract too many bees. In order to infiltrate as much water as possible in this large expanse, this design turned out to be 30 feet long and 6 feet wide. BMP site number 5 is on Berry Bay. at a private residence where we installed a water bar. A water bar intercepts runoff traveling down moderately steep downslopes and diverts it into stable vegetated areas to reduce erosion.
We are installing a water bar at this driveway in order to capture stormwater runoff before it gets down to the lake. Here I have a simple illustration by the Soak people where you can see a finished water bar design, and there will be 6x6 pressure treated beams inlaid flush with the ground here. And then around that we will be filling it with crushed 3/4 inch stone. That stone is going to slow down the water and infiltrate it into the ground before it reaches the lake. I'm here with some Boy Scouts today doing the hard labor, which is awesome. And we've got some hand tools and some powered digging equipment. But most of this water bar will be installed by hand.
A trench was dug by the Boy Scouts with help from the excavator, and 6x6-inch pressure-treated beams were laid in the trench and anchored down with steel rebar. Next, the excavator helped dump in the crushed stone, and the Boy Scouts smoothed it out by hand. Through these projects, our volunteers not only helped get things done, but they had the opportunity to learn about water quality and the engineering behind each BMP. BMP site number 6 is on Deer Cove Road, which is on the northwest side of Ospey Lake. This project was unique in that we partnered with 2 private residents who shared this beach area, as well as the town of Ossipee, whose road agent was in charge of maintaining this paved road directly on the beach. We built 2 dry wells lined with landscaping fabric and filled with crushed stone. Each dry well was approximately 4 by 3 feet and 2 to 3 feet deep. For this project, it was important to consider that people would be walking over these designs in bare feet. Thus, we chose a smaller, rounder pea stone as opposed to the 3/4 inch stone. The designs are not only functional, but look good too. And finally, rain barrels. Here we see the double rain barrel system installed at the GMCG office in Effingham. Rain barrels capture water from a roof and hold it for later use, such as on lawns and gardens or indoor plants, especially during a drought. Collecting roof runoff in rain barrels reduces the amount of water that flows from your property. It's a great way to conserve water, and it's free for use in your landscape. And that's just a quick recap of the BMP work we do at GMCG. Please visit gmcg.org to learn more.
Okay, thank you everyone for watching. That's just the beginning of the BMP work we're doing. And I'd like to quickly share an update at Danforth Bay Campground. I just visited there the other day, and there's been more work done, and I'd like to share that. And Craig, if you're on, after I share this video from the other day, you're welcome to add anything you want, and I'll have a moment for a Q&A about that design. Thanks for your patience. Okay.
Hi, I'm Craig Nealer from Danforth Bay Camping Resort. This area is our lakeside area. We have a beach down below and the part of Danforth Bay that we actively use for canoe and kayaks and paddle boards and things like that. It's an awesome space. The problem we've had for a long time is that we have this sloping ground that leads down to the lake, and all the water that comes off these buildings and these concrete surfaces tends to run right down into the lake. And I think you've already seen the photographs of what happens when you have running water. Naturally, there's woodland and underbrush that absorbs that water. Once you put a set of stairs in, that ability to absorb goes away. So what we've done, and we're very excited about, is we created a whole system to handle stormwater runoff and allow it to percolate into the ground, and therefore not carry all the different pollutants that come from roofs and parking lots and things like that. These things are not being carried into the lake. So we have this very cool set of stairs. It starts here, where we have water runs through this whole area off these roofs, really to some extent out of the parking lot, just naturally ends up getting funneled onto this concrete surface. It spills into this sedimentation well here. The bottom is concrete. You can see how much debris it catches. So there is a concrete bottom down there, but it's been doing a terrific job. Each of these layers has a little spillway that allows clean water off the top of the pool to drop into the next layer. And little by little, all these stairs that go down are dug down into the ground and lined with filter fabric, filled with 1.5-inch stone, and the water just drops into the ground. It's like magic. They're really very effective. We've had several big storms earlier this year. Not a single drop of water made it. Even with all of this surface area that it's draining, every drop of the water was absorbed by this set of stairs and did not run through like it had been. In addition to that, we have the roof runoff from this building here, which is we dug what's called an infiltration trench down in here. We've got this washed stone that allows water to freely percolate down into this trench, and there is a perforated pipe that runs down this trench and connects into a dry well right here. And again, during the heavy storms where we had runoff, it was running down this embankment right here. 100% of this is caught by the infiltration trench, and again, just like magic, disappears into the ground. The completion phase of this project is essentially creating an enclosed area. It's like a giant water bar. We have basically landscaping timbers here that are getting set in. This will drain back into the trench, which will be lined with filter fabric and covered with 3/4-inch stone to have an attractive surface. It's going to look really nice, but what people won't realize is that it's actually there to allow water to drain and just contain any water that wants to run into the lake. Instead, it's going to run into the drainage system. That's what we have going.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you everyone for hanging in there. Craig, you feel free to unmute yourself and add anything that we didn't cover there.
Should have combed my hair. Yeah, we're pretty excited about that project. We really appreciate all the support we've gotten from you guys. And I will say that in our situation, having a partner like Green Mountain has been a motivating factor for all the rest of the powers that be around our park to really do it right and to really, put a lot of effort into getting the system functioning. And really the final product will be done tomorrow, actually. And it's going to look great, and it's already functioning really well. So we're really pleased with it, and we certainly appreciate the effort that you guys have put into making this happen.
All right, well, thank you. And something else I'd like to add about the video we just watched, those 6 sites are meant to be showcases. So we knew that we weren't going to improve water quality on the whole lake just by doing 6 sites, but the idea is to start the momentum and inspire other homeowners to follow suit and see that these DIY projects are not just functional, but they can actually improve the aesthetic of your property and really benefit not just you, but your neighbors and the whole community. And so the watershed management plan, that's a roadmap for the future protection of the lake. And phase 3 is acting upon the recommendations set forth in phase 1 and 2. Those recommendations are mainly BMPs, and that includes proper septic maintenance. But what we're really talking about today is cyanobacteria and next steps for Danforth Bay. And what it really kind of boils down to is phosphorus, and how do we, I have to let someone in here. How do we prevent phosphorus from entering the lake? And BMPs is our focus right now. And I would just like to take one moment to share my screen one more time. Hopefully it won't take too long. Jill, can you see that? Okay.
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, I can see that.
So here are just some extra pictures from the campground. And here we have the beginning of our discussion about next steps. So these are just recommendations from Green Mountain. We have many years of experience in facilitating community mobilization. We facilitate various committees, and we're very supportive of these processes. So these are recommendations. Some are individual things that homeowners can do, and then some other actions are things that groups of people can do. So what can property owners do to minimize their disturbance impact? In the video, you probably noticed these Google Earth images with different colors around them. And that was a rating system that we contracted a private contractor to write our watershed management plan. They are called Forest Bell Associates. And they used a system, a rating of 0 to 10, to rate parcels by their disturbance. So how much vegetation was missing, how many impervious surfaces or buildings were within 50 feet of the shoreline. These things contributed to their ratings. And there are also minimum standards set forth in New Hampshire's Shoreland Water Quality Protection Act. And that was instated in 1991, and it's had some revisions. And that's available as a PDF at des.newhampshire.gov. And that is just basically they set forth the minimum guidelines that you should be following. So if you check this out, there are different zones. So from the water line, there's the waterfront buffer. You want this area to have good ground cover, vegetation that is well established. You really don't want any impervious surfaces here. Many properties are grandfathered in, and they do have patios, docks, hopefully not too much pavement, but it can happen. Up to 150 feet is your woodland buffer. Again, you want as much vegetation as possible. And then up to 250 feet is protected in this act. And that zone can include buildings. It usually does. And so if you check out these standards, that will give you an idea for your self-assessment. There are also tools that you can use for self-assessment. We recommend newhampshirelakes.org, and they have this online survey you can take where you plug in the different like square footages and dimensions of your property and your buildings, and they can help you evaluate how lake-friendly your property and your activities are. And then another great resource for do-it-yourself BMP designs is Soak Up the Rain, New Hampshire. This booklet is available as a PDF online, and in here there are wonderful illustrations and instructions. Here, infiltration steps like we saw at Danforth Bay Campground. So another wonderful resource for homeowners who are located on shorefront property. Community actions we recommend. If you are being proactive yourself in your own BMPs, talk and share what you've learned with your neighbors. If you are a concerned citizen, start an email list of other concerned citizens. We recommend exploring forming an association or stakeholder group. Ossipee Lake has multiple groups already established. And if Danforth Bay was to pursue forming some sort of association or concerned citizens committee, there are other groups that you could reference and take inspiration from. Create a list of obtainable goals. So Green Mountain's BMP project lasted 2 summers, and our goal was 6 to 8 BMPs. Now, we're already juggling a lot of other things, but each BMP actually took quite a lot of organization and volunteers. The cost was low. The way we worked was we partnered with the property owner. They provided the materials, and we provided the engineering and design, and also wrangled the volunteers and tools. So it was very much a partnership. If you were a private homeowner trying to do something like what Danforth Bay Campground did, you'd probably have to hire a contractor. That was a more intricate engineering job, and that design was completed by Forest Bell Engineering. The other designs you saw, such as the water bar and the rain gardens, were designed and engineered by GMCG staff. So after you create a list of obtainable goals, you can explore funding opportunities. So Green Mountain Conservation Group we funded the creation of the watershed management plan, and also that was created using 319 funds. The EPA requires that you have a watershed management plan in place before you apply for more. So the fact that this exists means that conservation commissions that are document if your town is documented in the plan. Freedom, Effingham, and Ossipee are all on the lake, so they're all in the watershed management plan. You can use this plan to apply for funds. And just recently, Green Mountain, we were like, our plan is getting a little old. We're wondering if it's still applicable. And we just had a brief conversation with some of our contacts at DES, and most watershed management plans are considered viable for up to 10 years. So the first phase of ours was written in published in 2015. Phase 2 was 2018. So ours is still viable and still usable right now. We also recommend partnering with established groups such as GMCG and fostering communication and partnership with your local conservation commission. So the Ossipee Watershed Management Plans are available online at gmcg.org. Phase 1 focuses on Danforth Ponds and the lower bays of Ossipee Lake, and the Phase 2 focuses on the Big Lake. Danforth Bay is documented in Phase 1. All right, and that is the end of that presentation. I would like to open this up for any kind of Q&A, whether with me or Jill or Craig. And I don't have any messages in the chat, but if you would like to unmute yourself and ask a question, go ahead.
Question for Jill. On Danforth, is there anything about the numbers that you showed on some of your graphs? Is it marginal that's causing the blooms, or have we a significant problem?
I mean, usually when you see up to 30 micrograms of phosphorus, that tends to be the level that you start to see issues with cyanobacteria blooms. It's hard. The different species of cyanobacteria require different amounts of phosphorus. So the levels are certainly high enough that we've seen that this is causing a problem. But there's no, you know, set number that a lake needs to hit when then suddenly cyanobacteria will go, oh yes, like this is the correct amount that I need. Each one kind of needs a different amount for it. And it's not well known what that level is. The state just signals usually that once you're around that 30 microgram number, you're going to, you have higher likelihood of seeing issues.
You had that study that showed the rating around the bay, and I was wondering, almost all of us have a set of stairs or a ramp that at some point, especially with the more heavy rains of the last 3 or 4 years, wash something in. If we tried to promote people putting one of those BMPs in place at the bottom of their stairs or their ramps, and we got a 25% participation, do you think that kind of number would help?
I mean, every little bit helps. I am very encouraging of everybody to do their part. But when lakes start to have issues like cyanobacteria, the best analogy to use is death by 1,000 paper cuts. So you can do, you know, you as a concerned landowner can do all of the BMPs that you need to do, and you absolutely should, but you're only as effective as your weakest link. So this is where we're hopeful that, you know, neighbors tend to be pretty friendly with neighbors. And if you at house A do a BMP, you can showcase it to your neighbor at house B and get them inspired. It's a lot of what our watershed management plan shows is that about 88% of the phosphorus loading in the lake is coming from an external source. Usually that external source is, as you've noted, stormwater runoff. So really the goal here is to try to get everybody who is a property owner on the lake to be looking at their own property and then implementing anything that's going to help that water prevent from getting into the lake. But yeah, you're pretty much only as strong as your weakest link.
And when you do the testing, do you go into Upper or the old Huckins and see the stream that's coming down from the horse stables and the farmland?
So the way that the VLAT program runs is that the testing is only done in the deep spot, which is kind of near the bridge by Ossipee Lake Road, that one that's being revamped right now, or maybe it's done by now. And so there isn't any testing that goes up higher. We, for the rivers program, do have a monitoring site that is in between that Upper Huckins and depending on who you are is either Upper Danforth or Middle Danforth. And one of the things that we do monitor for is phosphorus coming out and what's coming into that Middle Danforth lane. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic this year, we haven't been able to take those samples because our partners at UNH just really struggled opening. But we do have some historic phosphorus data coming from up there, and from what we've been able to see in our limited capacity, there hasn't really been a ton of phosphorus coming from upstream. That doesn't mean that upstream doesn't have its own problems, but it's nothing that has been significantly high.
So you're basically saying it's more local to us.
From the limited data that we have, I would say it is probably more local to the lake. It's not to say that people upstream shouldn't also be doing their part. Obviously, water knows no bounds. Everybody who is in any sort of water area, it's eventually going to drain into somewhere. And so anybody who has a water body that they live near that is going into Danforth is affecting it one way or the other. One of the things that I personally am wanting to pursue with the state is to find out what sort of testing should be done in maybe a more rigorous manner in that middle or upper Danforth area, because right now that's not where the VLAP program touches.
All you have to do is call me. You're welcome to go up there anytime. I'll give you access anytime you want to go in.
I'm sorry, who am I talking to? Just because, like,
This is Bruce Howland. My name's Bruce Howland, and I have that gate across the road going up to Upper Danforth.
Okay. I will probably give you a call sometime in the winter because we're looking to do a winter project on the lakes that hasn't quite gotten off the ground yet, but hopefully will.
I'll send you some contact info.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay, I have to leave. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. All right, does anyone have any other comments or questions for myself or Phil or Craig?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
Sorry, I joined late. I thought it was starting at 7. And so I turned on my computer at 6:45 and I'm like, oh crap. I'm off by an hour.
Yeah, apologies. We did have an incorrect time posted and it kind of got spread quite far, so apologies.
That's okay. So I have no idea what you've already talked about, but real quick.
All right. Well, thankfully we are recording this meeting, so you'll be able to watch it later.
I will. My question was, are you at all familiar with the system sold by that Dutch company called LG Sonic? Does this ring a bell?
Is it an aeration or a manual mixer?
No, it's the one that uses the sound ultrasound waves.
Okay, no, I'm not familiar with it.
It's really interesting. It's a Dutch company, and they're worldwide. It's called LG Sonic, and basically it takes advantage of the fact that the bacteria come up to the surface during the day and then sink down a little bit at night. And so it's a solar powered buoy it uses no chemicals. It's supposedly not harmful at all. It's a solar powered buoy that sits on the top of the water, and it emits like a sonic kind of like a sound wave in the top, little bit of the water. And what it creates a sort of a barrier, a sound barrier that they can't float up to the surface. So they get trapped down below and then they die from lack of sunlight. And I had talked to that guy a couple of years ago when this all first started happening, and I asked him about, because we're in the Narrows, and I asked him about a system for just our section. And then he took all these stats, the Latin long, and looked at the whole lake and the inputs and blah, blah, blah. And he said, no, it's coming from up, the campground side of up on the lake. And you can't treat the Narrows without treating that first. So the price he gave me at the time was like $165,000 or something. But I sort of always intended to talk to the campground about it. And then, life gets in the way and I didn't get around to it. But I've been meaning to contact them again now. Here, this is 2 or 3 years later, and maybe get an updated estimate. Because my feeling is you got to try something. And, and even if it's just as a test project to see if it does work. Because when you look at their literature, and they have done stuff in these reservoirs and water systems all over the world, it sounds pretty intriguing. And also, I'm the one who posted that comment about the milfoil. And if there is some interconnectivity between the two issues, you spend 40 grand or whatever every summer to dump chemicals in the water to kill the milfoil, and then you get all this sediment and stuff on the bottom. And, milfoil, I realize isn't invasive and everything else, but on the other hand, it does suck a lot of nutrients out of the water. And maybe instead of killing it, you maybe could leave it like a like a lawn that's sort of mowed to suck up nutrients. And then if you paid, instead of dumping chemicals to kill it, if you paid for like one of those mowing skimmer machines to take the milfoil tops out of the lake system, you'd be removing all that organic matter over time. Because from what I understand is that, you know, with the weather getting warmer, and there are always got to be failing old septic systems and stormwater runoff and loads and loads of sediments that are built up in the bottom of the lake, realistically, it's going to be years and years and years before you can ever really get the nutrient load down. So why not use the milfoil to help reduce that load in a more quick manner now? You know what I'm saying? I was thinking outside the box about that, about the milfoil, you know? I'd rather have milfoil than toxic bacteria. At least I can swim in milfoil. It's not going to kill me.
Can I jump in on that?
Sure.
So yeah, Joanne, I work at the campground, and you've got a bunch of interesting thoughts there. Once you start mechanically harvesting milfoil has the unique characteristic where every little sprig re-roots. And the famous situation is in Lake Bomoseen over in Vermont, where they have a full-time crew that drives that harvester all day, every day in the summertime. Because once they started doing it, it spread so quickly that now that's their only choice. So, I mean, back in the day, there was we used to hire divers to extract the milfoil before the state was involved. We had permits, but they weren't actually funding anything. We were funding it all. And, you know, obviously that you're pulling the nutrient out when you're extracting. I've been in contact with a company, it's a U.S. company, it's a nationwide company, and they, you know, it hasn't gone very far, but I've started looking into their stuff, and they have a different mechanically dredging, but it is extremely expensive, and it requires a lot of different permitting. It is not easy to do. So, and I think you're right. There's the nutrient loading comes over a period of years, but I do think that, like Bill said, the death by 1,000 paper cuts. If we can cover up some of those cuts, we can do a lot of good. And the role milfoil plays, I mean, who knows? That's an interesting thought. We've been sort of batting that around. It's not a proven connection, but it certainly could be part of the solution.
So Craig, I don't mean to diss on the campground. My beloved high school boyfriend was the son of the Pasco family who had the campground before you guys. So I have wonderful memories of the campground and love the place. But anyway, I only met them, and we did have a diver. Our next door neighbor would dive in the Narrows just to keep our little section clear. But then he goes and joins the Peace Corps, so he's not around anymore.
Is that Nichols?
Anyway,
Yeah.
no, I only met the milfoil sort of as a short-term suck up the nutrient level, and then maybe you could go back to killing the suckers. I mean, I know how horribly, how quickly they spread from every little, you know.
But if I may interject, though, your proposed solution is only a Band-Aid on a bullet hole, because you haven't actually done anything to mitigate the real problem, which is the phosphorus is getting into the lake to begin with. So, I mean, even if this were to work, which is a big if, you haven't actually solved the real problem of preventing that phosphorus from getting into the lake to begin with. So maybe if that did work, you'd have a few years of clearness while you've now introduced a bunch of other problems because the milfoil has now run rampant. And so it still hasn't quite solved the issue. The issue is putting in these BMPs so that you're preventing the phosphorus from getting in. And you're right about the septic systems, but homeowners should be having their septics checked as well, which would also go a long way into helping the health of that lake. The other thing I wanted to point out before we run out of time is that any sort of lake-wide mitigation technique, so whether it is aeration, a chemical alum treatment for cyanobacteria, none of these have currently been approved by the state of New Hampshire as adequate treatments. That's coming in the next couple of, because people that we've talked to at DES, but right now they're really wanting people to work on stormwater runoff managements. So, you know, you can get in touch with all of these lake management companies that you want, but there's nothing that's going to get approval from New Hampshire DES at this time.
And just to jump in on that, I spent a day in the boat with Amanda McQuaid, and we toured everywhere. We went up into Huckins, you know, up into the upper Danforth, Huckins Pond. And when we got chatting about what Jill's talking about, she was very clear. She's like, unless we have real buy-in from the people around your lake association, and we know people are managing their own waterfronts, we're not going to approve other measures to deal with it. So we all have to manage our own waterfronts first,
right,
before the state will consider jumping in.
May I ask a question, please?
Yes.
Hi. I've had my property. Sorry, I've never done a Zoom call in my pajamas before. I've had my property 13 years, and I as my voice you can tell, I don't come from New Hampshire. So I really I'm sort of a newbie compared to the sort of 15 generations or whatever a lot of people around there are. But is this a new problem, or is it an old problem that's got worse, or is it just something that people put in the past tolerated?
So milfoil has been in the lake for more than 20 years. That much we know, and it's an invasive species that increases with time. The cyanobacteria, I think the first known bloom that we saw was 3 years ago.
3 years ago.
Right.
And that,
I remember that.
Yeah, that's the first time it's ever happened. And I think we all go, well, I haven't changed anything. So, and it was never a problem in the past. But we know there's a lot more use of the lake, and there's a lot more people spending more time up in our area. So I think we all have to maybe take a step backwards and kind of be more careful about what we're doing. What we did in the past, and it was no problem, but there's just so much more activity now that we probably, what the lake used to be able to tolerate, it can't really tolerate anymore.
So I think I remember that one when I was swimming, and you get sort of speckles on your skin. It looks like little bits of confetti all over you. I had no idea what it was. I mean, I just carried on swimming and just ignored it. I mean, I just assumed it was some sort of plant growth or some pollen or something, and just carried on. But I do remember that. That was one of the first episodes, was it, in Danforth, about 4 years ago?
The summer before last was the first time I had seen it.
Question to Jill, please.
Pardon, did someone have a question?
Question for Jill. I understand the issue of runoff from roofs in parking lots, but are there other major contributors to phosphorus? Typical day in and day out things that we're using and we're not aware of?
So fertilizer use, I'm able to go along the shoreline and see an awful lot of pretty plants, which, I aesthetically appreciate, but from a lake health management prospect, there should be no fertilizer usage within, I think it's like 75 feet of the shoreline, or maybe even further back than that. Or I think at 75 feet, then you're allowed to use a low phosphorus or a slow release version of it. I mean, things, even things like grass clippings or animal waste. So you've got a dog that's, going out onto your lawn. Of these types of things can also slowly contribute to, they're all organic materials. And so they're all going to contribute to phosphorus loads. So this is, again, the whole death by 1,000 paper cuts. There are some driveways, the way that they are pitched, that driveway is basically working like just as bad or worse than a rooftop would. And so if it's just rolling over the driveway across your lawn and into the water, that's what we're trying to prevent here. You want that water to go into the ground first, and then, later on it can go out into the lake from the ground.
There's still gray water Are there still gray water dry wells allowed around the lakefront?
No, no, you may have an old one, but those are no longer permittable by the state.
Right.
Thank you.
All right. Well, to anyone who came in recently, we had an incorrect time posted out there in the world. So if you logged in for 7 o'clock, I'm very sorry. But we have recorded this meeting, and we will be posting it next week so you can catch the beginning. We need to wrap up. Jill sitting in her car in a parking lot somewhere, and we need to let her go home. Again, my name is Moselle. I'm the outreach coordinator at Green Mountain Conservation Group, and this has been a wonderful community discussion about water quality issues on Danforth Bay. We hope that you have noted some of the links we shared in the presentation, notably familiarizing yourself with SOAK New Hampshire. This is a resource for do-it-yourself best management practices. And I think a lot of issues we've talked about touch upon the Shoreline Protection Act, and you can learn about those minimum standards for the different waterfront zones, 50 feet, 150 feet, 250 feet, and what's recommended that you improve within those different buffers. Again, thank you so much for watching, and we will post the whole video after the holiday, so look for it Tuesday at gmcg.org. Thanks, Craig. Thank you for everyone's questions, and we'll be logging off. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. Here's me.